To hand over to Brodie Cambourne, the exercise physiologist in Nowra, who's going to tell us about the fabulous work that she's doing, combining exercise, diet and lifestyle and doing education with groups of older people. So there might just be a minute. She's ready? Brodie, good day. How are you doing?
Hi, Liz and everybody. Thanks for having me. I'll just bring my screen up now, if that's okay.
Yes. And I'll get out of the picture and we'll look forward to hearing what you've got to say, Brodie.
Okay. Let's see how I do this. Okay, so that should be up there. So can you see that, Liz?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you everybody for having me. I'm a little bit nervous talking to myself, so I'm going to pretend there's a whole lot of people there. And I'm just going to try and make this a little bit of a storytelling session, because that's the way my father, who's an educator, has taught me to help people learn. So following on from Liz, the area I'm going to speak about today is how do we get these messages across to everybody, so from all age groups, and especially our older adults who are really locked into that have to have porridge every morning scenario, because somewhere along the line they were taught that that would decrease their cholesterol. So before I get into that, I'll just give you a little bit of background of why I'm so passionate about this area, and then we'll go into some of the resources and ideas that I've been using in the last few years to try and help older adults and people who have survived strokes, people with neurological disorders, how they can engage better with this information while it's probably the most important time for them to do it post-brain injury. So who am I? I'm an accredited exercise physiologist. So I graduated 25 years ago, before exercise physiology was really recognised as a health service in the Medicare system. So during that time, I really had to get out and get right into health promotion to get some work. So I opened the first kids gym in Australia 25 years ago, and my research was on weight management for children. And during that time, I found it really frustrating that the food guidelines we were using for children was creating an uphill battle for me to help these kids enjoy exercise as well. So exercise became a chore. It became something they weren't enjoying. And so I kind of lost my mojo in that area a little bit. And somehow my work gravitated over to babies and new parents. So I had to restructure how I was teaching parents about exercise, so that babies would enjoy exercise naturally as they grew up. So some of that is what I'll talk about today, and that's where Fiteracy came from in the first few years. So the last 15 years I've been involved in brain health, right from post-traumatic stress to brain injury, neurological disorders such as Parkinson's, stroke rehab. And so in the last 5 years, I really started to have a look at some of the research into low carb. Being an endurance paddler myself, I had been noticing a lot of the older people that I was paddling with, or people my age, starting to become unwell doing the same events that I was doing. And I've had heart surgery. I've also got one kidney, so I didn't really want to damage myself. So I started looking at the research of low carb, so I could paddle better and protect my own body. And then that kind of took me down the rabbit hole of looking at how this is affecting our brain at all ages. So you can see from this photo here, the photo on the left with me behind the car, this was when I was training as hard as I could, 3-4 hours a day. I hadn't done anything different. I was still training as hard as I could to manage my weight and to be able to do the distances in the paddling that was required. And I was just gaining more and more weight, and I couldn't understand why this was happening. So I started looking up carb loading and where that came from, and that's how I stumbled across the Tim Noakes story. So that's kind of what opened the door for me to, and the rabbit holes open then, and I was hooked on it all then. So over the last 4 years, I've managed to maintain my weight, but it wasn't for that reason. I was really trying to look after my mental health, my ability for my heart to keep pumping during these races, and also just stay awake during the day. I was falling asleep at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the more stories I listened to of other health professionals in this area, I realised I wasn't the only one that was starting to feel that way as well. So the more I read this research, the more I thought, how can I get this through to my clients? And how can I get them to engage in this and change their learning? So they'd learnt for 30 years this way to eat. So I have a large range of clients. So I have clients that are referred every day for metabolic health conditions, neurological clients, older adults, many clients with PTSD, and I still have children getting referred in as well. So I had to think about how I was going to get this message across, and how I was going to get it across without upsetting the health system, which was one of the scary things as well. So you can see from the picture up the top, that's some of my older clients. So I have people in large groups on ovals that can range from 19 years of age up to 90. They're there for falls prevention. They may be there because they've had a stroke. Some of these people are there for metabolic health as well. I also run water-based groups for post-stroke rehabilitation, PTSD. The important thing to also note is that I am very passionate about equal access to health information. So my large groups like these ones on the oval, we only charge $5 for, because I'm really trying to reach out to the people that need the help who can't access regular health services due to cost as well. That passion developed many years ago when I was working in remote Indigenous communities, and some of the funding I received in my health promotion was to go into the lower socioeconomic areas where, as we know, incidence of chronic disease is larger in these areas. So I needed to come up with a method that could help people of all backgrounds, cultures, and socioeconomic status, so that they can have the equal opportunity to change their lifestyles with the latest evidence also. So what I wanted to share with you today is the role of exercise physiology in metabolic health and brain health, how I am trying to share that through the Fiteracy programs, and why I think being a critical thinker is important for your health. So they're the messages that I try to get across to my clients of all ages. So trying to get my Parkinson's clients to be critical thinkers of their health is a challenge. And I'm going to try and share with you today how I'm doing that. So before I start, I just wanted to say that there are a number of things that I actually now feel really confident to say as an exercise physiologist. So, and that confidence has only come along because of people like Tracy and Liz and Jessica Turton and Rowena, having that supportive group to support me as a health professional, because it's a pretty scary area out there on your own, talking low carb sometimes. So the more I read, the more books I read, the more podcasts like Low Carb MD, the more confident I started to feel. So these are the 3 things that I say to my clients when they come in, is that if they have a metabolic health condition such as diabetes or insulin resistance, then the food pyramid is not the guidelines they should be following. If they want to lose weight and sustain weight loss, they'll need to also consider changing their diet. And if you have a neurological condition or a mental health condition, learning about the latest evidence in the area of nutrition and brain health will not hurt you. So I have to speak about it quite loosely due to the boundaries that we have sometimes in exercise, but they're the things I'm really confident to say. So I'm really working hard at getting people with neurological conditions to understand that if they are metabolically unwell, exercise alone is not going to prevent any more decline, and that the importance of having a look at their lifestyle and their diet may just make living with that disease so much easier. So the gentleman you see there in the main picture, and he's given me permission to share his story. He's a bit of a superstar. Gavin was 44 when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And the reason I got so passionate was over the last, say, 10 years, you do have a big influx or turnover of people that come in with Parkinson's. So during the initial years of me working as an exercise physiologist in Parkinson's, I got so close to all these people that come in every week through the groups. So at any one week, I'd have 50 to 60 people with Parkinson's in groups. Any, 1 year, that might be 200 people. And as you can imagine, those statistics of watching those people decline and losing some of your greatest friends in those groups through such a non-timeline disease. So it never happens the same way for one person. So when I started having younger people walk through the door with Parkinson's, I became really adamant that we have to do everything we can to start to get the latest evidence across in this area. And that evidence took me down the path of the low carb diet. So Gavin was quickly whisked off to see Jess Turton. And together with Jess over the last 2 years, Gavin has been one of my Parkinson's people who's actually been able to decrease his level of medication. And I put that down mainly to his ability to be really strict with his diet. And he himself comments on how much more energy he has during the day. His tremors aren't as bad. His cognition is so much better. He's still working. So we kind of use Gav as a bit of a model in our groups, and he's become a mentor for other men and women, but particularly men who are newly diagnosed with Parkinson's. And he shares some of his ideas on our Zoom groups or in our classes on how he's been able to manage either intermittent fasting or changing his diet down to low carb. So one of the problems I had when I first was running Parkinson's groups was the afternoon teas that people brought in. So every exercise group ended in a big afternoon tea full of cake and biscuits. And I was left standing there thinking, all this exercise that we've just done and you've just filled your brain with sugar again. So now I've cut my groups right down to the people who really want to work on both. So I've really decreased my selection criterion down to making sure that the people come in are willing to actually want to learn about lifestyle too. So that's where the Fiteracy Workshops started, because I needed to outreach to people who couldn't afford to come in every day. Most of my people are bulk billed through the EPC system, and I needed a way to help people to become connected to other people that could mentor them. So the group started off just as 1 or 2 people, and you can see on the Facebook picture there that we're up to over 150 members. We have workshops every 2 to 3 weeks. Tracy often popped on there to give us some really great reality lifestyle kind of shopping ideas. Helps us go through continuous glucose monitoring graphs, and she's been a tremendous benefit to that group as well. So the Fiteracy Workshops were first initiated because my father, who you can see there in the picture, he's an educator who there he is getting his Order of Australia medal. My father developed a set of conditions of learning called Cambourne's Conditions of Learning to help people of all backgrounds, ages, cultures to learn how to read and how to speak. So what we have done is taken his conditions of learning and turn them into a way to help people of all ages, backgrounds and cultures to learn how to be critical thinkers of health, so that when they are watching advertising on TV, they are able to start to pick through what's fact and fiction. They also have the chance to have trial and error sessions on these Zoom groups where it's not always about getting your food right every day. It fosters encouragement, and we increase engaged learning on these groups. So the groups are based on a really sound practice of how the brain absorbs information. So that's our platform for trying to help older people, younger people, learn all this information that we're learning in this conference today. So we're learning some really good clinical and science-based information every day, but how do we turn it into resources or practice that every person we're working with can absorb that information? So that's where I fall back to my father's conditions of learning. So I also had to think back to how I taught babies. So there's some pictures of my 20 years ago, 15 years ago, working with babies and parents. So these were babies and parents in vulnerable areas. So we had baby Fiteracy courses, and it was all about teaching these parents that they could teach their kids to read, and they could also teach their kids about health concepts. So when I was flicking back through how I used to teach babies and parents, I came across the strength-based learning approach, which was one of the main things we really reiterate when we're learning how to read. So, and I've really applied that now to all my metabolic health clients, my neurological clients. So we really try to look at what their strength is as well. So when I found this slide the other day, and you can see the old logo down the bottom, some of the things that we worked on with babies and parents back then was focusing on relationship building, empowering people to take a lead in their own care process, working in collaborative ways, draw upon personal resources of motivation, and create sustainable change through learning and experimental growth. So our groups are all about that. So drawing upon personal resources of motivation and hope is one of the main factors of the success of this group. So there's no experts in our group. We always just talk about co-learning. And the part that we're really trying to focus on too is working collaboratively with doctors and other health professionals, which is a little battle on its own, but we're slowly getting there as well. You become informed learners, critical thinkers, and I want people to learn why it's important to become a critical thinker. I don't want my Parkinson's people 5 years down the track to ask why I didn't give them this information that we're all learning today from Liz and the other presenters. I want them to know now that that information's already out there, but we need to teach them how to access it, how to read it, how to interpret it. So it's important too to note that on these groups, sometimes we have guests and family members pop in. There's no exercise prescription offered online unless there's been a pre-screening session also. So to create these engaged learning environments, we needed people to feel safe telling their stories about low carb. The immersion of the information needs to be consistent. So we refer them to the diet doctor, refer them to podcasts like Low Carb MD. We share our learning. So that's the co-learning environment we have. We role model. So I use lots of stories of my own use of continuous glucose monitors. Gav comes in and teaches people a lot about the benefits for Parkinson's, and there's more and more of the Parkinson's people now starting to feel the benefits as well. So we invite them to share their stories. We let people know that it's all right to make mistakes. There's no mistakes in learning. And we also offer them to give us a lot of feedback and response. And so sometimes that can be quite challenging because they're so locked into low salt, low fat, have to have porridge for breakfast every morning. So being willing to listen and learn how we can break that trend has been a really good learning process for all of us as well. So yeah, the diet doctors are one of the main places that we go to. I just use that as my Bible for everything now due to the evidence-based access on there. And for the people interested in podcasts, I do set up a lot of my older people on the podcast because they've all got iPads now. And sometimes the sessions when I first see my neurological clients can be just setting them up on those podcasts first. So then I can start to give them some more information as we go along. So what I'm going to share with you now is just a few of the pictorials that I've tried to use to get some of my clients to understand what physiology is. So most of my clients have never even heard of the word insulin unless they're type 2 diabetic. And when I have clients first come in, they they hand me over their health summary, and whether they're a metabolic or a neurological client, when I look back at their last 15 years of their health summary, I wish they had learnt this 10 years beforehand. So when I look back and see when they started medication, when they had a cardiovascular incident, when I have a look at the ones that are now coming in with dementia or Alzheimer's, and I look back and see 15 years ago they were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, it's all, the jigsaw's all starting to take place. So I'm starting to get really quite passionate about making sure the new people coming in with that information, so they might be coming in as newly diagnosed type 2, they need to know what the risks of this can be in the future. The people that I've got who already have Alzheimer's and dementia, I'm trying my hardest to get them and their families, if they have a supportive network around them, to start to read some of this information. So books like Bredesen's book and Amy Burge's book are referred to a lot. So I'm just going to quickly share 4 pictures, because when I worked with children, picture analogies were the best way for them to learn, and our adult brain is no different to our child brain when it comes to absorbing that information. So the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to share some of these resources, and feel free to use these wherever you want. And the first one is the yellow spiked picture. So when people first come in, I try to explain to them the role of the food that they're eating in regards to how much exercise they're going to need to do. So most people that I have come in are already doing enough exercise. Most of them are walking 20 to 30 minutes a day already. They have maybe had a hip replacement. They're doing their falls prevention exercises. They can't understand why they're still putting on weight or why their blood sugars are out of control. And so sometimes that first initial exercise consult may be just reassuring them that their exercise is enough. They're walking more than most people if they're walking every day, but it's really time now to start learning about what you're eating. And this is one document that I just take them through with the yellow spikes indicating the rise in blood sugar from the foods below, which is a typical light and easy type program that I was on for a while that didn't help me much at all. And most of all, when I read this diet, especially my older people, this is what they're eating most of the day. So they're snacking 6 times a day. They're starting their day with porridge. And when we start to explain the physiology behind that and the need for insulin to come in and help push these blood sugars down, they're very confused about why they haven't learned this before. So I've really got to take it bit by bit. Otherwise, I can lose their engagement straight away because they think I'm, going against the Bible or something. So sometimes the easiest way is to ask them how many yellow spikes they can cut out each day. So if we can get down to 3 a day or 2 in the afternoon, and then replace these yellow spikes with something that's less carbohydrate dense, or even go into eating your breakfast later. So that's the diagram that I use with most people to start off with. And that seems to get people to start to understand the benefits of intermittent fasting too. So cutting out the fruit cup at the end of the day, and just making their breakfast a little bit later. So sometimes in 1 or 2 visits, that's as much as information I can get across, unless I can get these people onto one of the Zoom groups as well. So the whippersnipper analogy was just a concept I came up with when I was trying to explain to another gentleman that had come in about why even eating 10 pieces of fruit a day isn't going to work for him if he's trying to work on his metabolic health. So how we explain the whippersnipper. So I try to get the whippersnipper get people to think about their pancreas as the whippersnipper, and you'll be surprised how many people come in with type 2 diabetes who've never even heard of the word pancreas, which I find fascinating. So most of my people haven't had any education in basic physiology. So this is the easiest way to get them to think about, especially men who are mechanics or men mowing their lawns. If they had to start their whippersnipper 5 times a day, which is their pancreas releasing insulin, would that whippersnipper need servicing by the end of the week? And the answer is yes. So the more they start that whippersnipper, the more likely the whippersnipper line is going to need replacing. So that's the first sign of insulin resistance, or their blood sugars not being able to cope, so their HbA1c is going up. And eventually the whippersnipper breaks down, which is type 2 diabetes. So I'll ask these people sometimes, how many times a day do you want to start your whippersnipper? How are you going to service your whippersnipper? If your whippersnipper breaks, what's going to happen to your brain? So keeping the storytelling as relatable to their job also. So sometimes I'll get them to talk about what their job is, and pieces of machinery at work that might break down because they're getting used too much. It might seem simple, but it's a way to get people started, to start to want to learn more. So the rusty key analogy is another one that we use. So the rusty key I use a lot when trying to explain the benefits of exercise. So these are handouts that I'll hand out when I first meet people. So trying to explain to people the word insulin resistance is really quite difficult at times. And when I'm trying to get them to learn about insulin resistance in the brain, and the benefits of exercise for insulin sensitivity, then I need to take it out of this physiological, lots of words kind of explanation. So the rusty keys become a way to do that. So trying to explain to my groups about what insulin resistance is and type 2 diabetes, and that you can actually not have type 2 diabetes but also have insulin resistance, is really tricky because it's not very often measured in their standard blood tests. And although sometimes I'll ask for that when I write back to the doctors, it's not often measured. So I try to tell people that we're all at risk of insulin resistance, and we're all at risk of having a rusty key. So when the key gets turned too much to allow the insulin to let the blood sugars into the cells, then that key becomes rusty. And when that key locks up, then we can't get the right fuel into our brains either. So exercise becomes a way to keep the key not rusty. But if you're going to keep putting the key into an environment that makes it rusty, then you're going to have to keep cleaning it. So the easiest way to not get a rusty key is to not use it too much in those environments. So I often refer to the old Coke analogies, where you clean rust off your keys with Coke. And I try to explain to people what this would do to their brain. So have a look at what Coke is doing to your brain, doing to a rusty key, and imagine what that's doing to your cells. So that message starts to get across a little bit as well. So other interesting, I Googled what you can use Coke for the other day. And I was quite shocked that you could use it to clean your toilet. I didn't actually have any here to try it, but when I show people this one, it starts to get the message across that, if this is what it's doing to solid metal objects, imagine the effect of sugar on your brain. The other analogy I try to use, and this is especially important when we start to come up into the areas of brain health, is the full recycle bin. So when I'm trying to explain to people the role of insulin in moving blood sugar out of the bloodstream, I may use an analogy like a tractor, and then the tractor breaks down. And when the tractor breaks down, then there's nowhere to push the rubbish out. Another way that we use analogies to explain insulin is insulin unlocking the door to convert blood sugar to glucose for the body's fuel. I'll often use the analogy of the recycle centres where you take your bottles to, and what would happen if they started not working. Then you'd have a big pile up of rubbish outside every one of your centres where they are. And that's what's happening outside your brain as well. So when we have this extra blood sugars that can't be taken out of the bloodstream, exercise is not working as much because the keys become rusty, then this is what our brain looks like. So the recycle bins down below are an indication of what's happening around our brains. Scary, a little bit silly, but it's working. So some of our community stars, so I've just picked 2 men because the men's groups are the ones that are really growing at the moment, because I have a lot of men coming in who love their beer of an afternoon. I have a lot of men with Alzheimer's and dementia who were that beer drinking, sugar addicted person in their 40s and 50s. So I don't want these younger men I've got now going down that pathway. So the gentleman on your left, that's Gavin, the young man with dementia. The fella on the right is Bill, the bearded bullhead. Both different, complete different backgrounds. So Bill was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 6 months ago. He's now running 5 kilometres a day, walking at night time, but he's really quite strict on his diet. He shares so many good stories with all the other men on the group about what he eats. So he goes off and buys new waffle makers and shares how he's going with his cooking. He lives at home on his own, so he does all his own cooking, and he's a real mentor for some of the young men coming through now. So the rusty brain analogy is our last analogy. So that's the one that once I've taught people about the insulin resistance, then we'll start to have a look at what it does to your brain. So part of the work, part of the information I'm really starting to share now is the information on the link between type 2 diabetes and type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's and dementia. So just finding handouts that these guys can take back to their doctors. I'm getting some doctors coming on board, which is good. And some other resources that I use is I really encourage people to draw and write. So one of the things that I make all the people on the group do is keep a diary, because they will have a model that works sometimes. So they'll adopt a low carb lifestyle and exercise model, and then a month later that model will start to fall apart a bit. So it's really important for them to have a journal to show what was working, how energetic they felt, so they can come back to that model again. So that's my model there. I encourage people to draw it like that. It's amazing how people are too scared to draw. Probably can't understand any of that because my writing is very messy. And then our last session last week, we were starting to look at go-to foods, and that was inspired by Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. And some of the other podcasts with Amy Berger is starting to look at green foods that people can go towards. So green foods are your low carb options that are available in the fridge, ready for you to eat on the busy nights. So just to finish up, where we're leading our research now, our programs now, is the groups are growing more and more. So all my walking groups, my boxing groups, my falls prevention groups are all now, every session, the last 10 minutes is a chat about low carb. So every person that joins now knows that we need to have a chat about insulin resistance, metabolic health, and it's not a subject we're going to avoid. And every group now at the end is asking questions, putting their hands up and asking a question that they might have stumbled across in the media, or that they may have found on their doctors might have asked them.
I was getting ready, but
so all those groups now are becoming exercising, information sharing. They're kind of versions of the low carb Zooms we've had, but they're in person. So the older adults in that group now are getting all that information that Liz has shared, and they're all feeding that information back. So if you want to watch that information grow, please feel free to drop in on any of the websites that we have. And if you have any clients that would like to help, would like to join a Zoom group, please feel free to send me a message, and you're most welcome to come in on groups. They're all free. And then we can help you connect to more information from there. So it's getting a little bit noisy in the background. So I'm going to end there because it looks like our next speaker's coming in. So sorry if I was in a bit of a rush then, but I hope you can use some of those resources, and please feel free to ask how we use those resources for all ages. Okay, so I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to hand back over to Liz so she can introduce our next speaker. Thanks, Liz.